Okay, so hello again. So we're hoping to give you an answer to what can web archiving history tell us about preservation risks today. And I wanted to show you an old website, but first a bit of context. Because it's a website from our Access for All homepages. This was one of our collections that was promoted during the public event on Wednesday as well. And it's one of the first ever born digital collections that is on the Dutch UNESCO Memory of the World Heritage List. So we're very proud of that as a National Library, of course. So it's a special collection, as we have a selective web harvest as a national library. But this is a collection about the second internet provider in the Netherlands, Access for All. And we have archived over 3,000 homepages made between the mid-90s to 2001. And 404 of them were marked as digital treasures. And they were marked as that because of their old age, or because of their unique characteristics, or because they were very typical for a specific era or a trend. And one of those is Lisbeth's virtual home. So welcome to Lisbeth's virtual home. We're here at the front door. And this website was made in the mid-90s, and it's marked as one of those digital treasures because it met every characteristic there was for a digital treasure. So it was old in age, it had new features for that time. And one of those was that it was very interactive, and you could navigate through the house. So if you were to click on the front door, you would really enter the house. And if you did that, you would walk into the hallway, which we see here. In Dutch, but still, it was also in English, but these screenshots are in Dutch. You could see here like the hallway with the 4 colored doors and also a bulletin board, and you could click on that and really experience like what is in there. And if I were, for example, to click on the red door, I would walk into the kitchen, as I could see here, and I could see there was some dirty dishes, there was an egg. Someone was baking, apparently, and I could get these options like go further into the kitchen, or do I want to go back to the hallway and choose another door? Well, in this case, I decided to go a bit further. And here I found the cookbook. This was one of the interactive elements from the website as well, because if you were to click on the cookbook, you could browse it for recipes. And she's also like really trying to make it feel like you're in a house and experience all kinds of sounds and smells. For example, she says here in Dutch, the kitchen door is open. So she's really inviting you to go outside because you hear birds whistling, you hear children playing, you hear your neighbors. So she's really trying to make you experience it like you're walking through something, even though it's just a website. If we browse a bit further, we went up to the stairs and got into her bedroom. And here's Lisbeth, and maybe one of us or all of us had the same problem this morning, like, oh no, what to wear today? Lisbeth is also deliberately like, what should I do? And you can help her a bit. So you have these options, as you can see here. And you can choose her trousers or her skirt. You could choose what kind of top she should wear and what she should do with her hair and with her earrings. So you could click on one of those 3 options, and there were more than 300 options available. And if you clicked something randomly, you would see this, and she was dressed. So this was one of those things that was really new at the time. Again, mid-90s. So this was very special. But unfortunately, if you look very closely, you see this is a screenshot from 2020. It's not longer working anymore. But still, we think it's a digital treasure worth preserving. So these are the things that didn't work anymore. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time to really dive deep in it. But luckily, there is an English blog post from our colleague Johan van der Knijf. So I would urge you all to read it, because he is explaining what was exactly wrong, and he made a reconstruction of this website. And now it's partly working again. So that's more like internet archaeology, but still you can really learn a lot about it. But we also have the like non-working webpage where we want something with, and that came with some questions, of course. And one of those is, how do preservation solutions work for web archiving? So if you look like a classic preservation risk, you see file format obsolescence. So there's a file format, it's no longer working anymore. What should we do about it? And not luckily, but well, luckily you also have already decided on about this, but you should really have like thought about what is specific about this digital object. So what are the significant properties, to use the correct terminology? So you would decide on that with the producer. You would migrate it to a new file format, and then you would check on the significant properties like, okay, is it still there in the new file format? That would work for most digital objects, but it's slightly more complex for web archives. And why is that? Well, what is exactly significant? I think it was in session 2, I think it was Illyria who already said like, okay, an archive website is not the same as a live website, and that's exactly the fact. So you have to really like determine for yourself what is a significant property for a live website and what is significant for the archived website, because there's a difference. It might be a small one, but still it's a difference. So for example, we have another interactive element here from Lisbeth's home, which is the loo. And you could visit it and you could leave a message, and Johan, who did the reconstruction, did it. He said Johan was here. And it would appear on the graffiti wall. So you have to ask yourself, what do you want? Do you want like the screen capture from the mid-90s, from like the historical website, or do you still want to have it working in your archive to experience like how it was? It's a difference between the two, but it's very important to make that difference, because then you know like what is my significant property. With that, I hand it over to Daniel.
Yes, okay. So now we're going to take a bit of a look behind the scenes of this website. Yeah, if we take a look at this, I hope there are some web nerds in the audience actually who think this is pretty self-explanatory, but for all the other persons, I will go through it a bit. So there was this TV, and actually if you clicked on the link below, it would open up a video. And I don't think it was that advanced that it would actually play the video in the TV, but it would open up a new window. And when we try this in the archive version, it will say this Dutch message, which is saying the requested resource is not available. Yeah, so if we take a look at the source code of this little small link, we actually see that this video, this QuickTime movie, is embedded in a bit of JavaScript. So we could worry, of course, from a preservation perspective, like, okay, are we still able to open this QuickTime movie in a modern browser? But actually our first worry is that it isn't captured at all. So there's nothing to migrate here, actually. And we might get a clue from the way that the source code displays how this was embedded using JavaScript. So if we take a look at the settings that were used, and we used Heritrix for this, so we're going to take a bit of a look at the Heritrix settings. And yeah, then we see already the first property, which is extract JavaScript, which was set to false. And now actually I pasted a bit of the manual of the Heritrix, and this is the above. And it says that you could set this to true, but it could also lead to odd crawler behavior. And this sounds terribly scary, I think. So we could forgive people for turning it to false, actually. Yeah, but this is already the first example where we see that actually this is already the first setting, and there are two other ones. But already the first setting would actually lead to this video being skipped from the scope. So it would just not extract these links because of this setting. If you look at the other settings, they are also relevant if you want to extract links from JavaScript. And they're all over the place. So there, I placed them below each other for convenience sake for this presentation, but I can assure you that the settings files are very long and they are very complicated, and these JavaScript settings are all over the place, and also they are named in a way that is maybe like the speculative hops, the number 3. You might not directly relate this actually to JavaScript, but it is. So what this means from an OIS perspective, I think, I would argue that in web archiving, maybe there isn't really a producer. And yeah, this is debatable, of course, because you could say like maybe the original creator of the website is your producer, or maybe the webmaster is the producer. But I think if we scale this and we take the example of a domain crawl, then we start to see like, yeah, there isn't really one centralized institute that is handling all the websites or whatever, like would be the case with a publisher. Like I work in a library, so my reference for a producer would be a publisher, which would be a typical producer when we look at the OAS model. And yeah, this is really centralized publishing. So they have their metadata, they pool all the publications, but the internet is a decentralized network. So I would argue there isn't really a producer in web archiving. And what this leads to, yeah, the picture, you don't have to get all of this. It's just a small part of the OAS total model, but you already see some arrows going to and from the producer. And yeah, there are some important functions within the OAS model that actually rely on this producer. And one of them is the SIP design. So if you have a SIP, you know what it contains. The producer is the person who can stand that, okay, this is everything there is and it should look like this. And of course there's also agreement, so you can talk with your producer on what are the significant properties, and you can send a storage confirmation to the producer if you archived it correctly. And also you have preservation descriptive information. So yeah, so there's some descriptive information to extract from the SIP, and you can store that in the archive. So this would be the normal scenario, which would work, for instance, with books or scholarly publications. But it doesn't work like this for the web. So just to tease the digital preservation community a bit, I created this picture. It's a bit of an adaptation from the normal OAS picture. And I thought, just to stir up a bit of debate, I hope lots of people take screenshots and put them on social media as well. Yeah, I thought maybe the OAS model should look like this, actually, when we talk about web archiving, and especially large-scale automated web archiving, like domain crawls. So instead of a SIP, a submission information package, we have just the normal IP traffic. And yes, this is pun intended. Yeah, we have the whole internet. So the whole internet is our producer in a way. And yeah, our settings are actually the things that create our SIP. So we cannot have a SIP design by talking to a producer. The producer isn't able to guarantee us anything. We should use the settings as a form of a SIP design. And it is also yeah, taking the place of the agreements you would have with your producer in a way. So the settings are really important, and they are really part of the archive. So instead of something that is determined with an outside party, all this work is going on inside the archive, actually. So to determine the completeness, to determine what should be in the archived website and what not, what should go into the WARC. All of this is determined by the settings. And I would also argue that instead of descriptive information, there's more of a focus on context information. So for instance, the log files that are produced by Heritrix when we crawl a website, this is context information which is stored. So instead of extracting descriptive information from a SIP, we produce log files and store those along with the WARC. What we also see is that actually when we look at the access part, it's not really a simple case of producing a DIP from a WARC, for instance, because we might have completely different requirements from our users. So I drew a research environment because it can happen that people just want a research environment and they might not need or need to order a WARC or something. This is not a process that is useful when you're doing link analysis, for instance. You don't want to produce dips and order WARCs or whatever. You just want to do queries, and this is your data. So you rely on a search index, for instance. So yeah, I think the OAS model looks a bit different for web archiving. This would be my point. But it's debatable, so I'm looking forward for discussion also. So my conclusion is more effort is required within the organization because we're missing this producer role. So extra attention should be given to the settings and really testing these settings and see what they do when it comes to integrity and authenticity of the things we are trying to retrieve from the internet. Also, the settings can be considered the equivalent of agreements with the producer on what should be in the submission information package. And I think also this leads us to the thought that probably completeness is more of a preservation priority than obsolescence, because if we don't retrieve it, it's gone anyway, so there's nothing to migrate. So I think, yeah, as a priority, I think making sure that your archives are complete is more of a preservation priority. And then if some of the things like the QuickTime movies aren't displaying in a browser anymore, we can probably fix that later on. So, thank you.